The moment Ethan Miller walked off the stage, the world didn't just watch, it stopped. At first, the crowd didn't quite register what was happening. A beat passed. Then another. Applause filled the high school auditorium like rolling thunder, as Principal Hartley raised Amara Thomas's hand in the air, declaring her the winner of the state oratory championship. Students, parents, teachers, every single person in the room rose to their feet, clapping, whistling, cheering for her. And Ethan walked away. His perfectly pressed navy suit, his starched white collar, his polished shoes, they all moved stiffly under the weight of something invisible but crushing. As he turned and headed toward the curtains, he didn't look back. Not once. He didn't shake her hand. Didn't clap. Didn't smile. He didn't say a single word. The silence behind his footsteps said everything. It wasn't just disappointment. It was disbelief. This was Ethan Miller, Golden Boy Ethan, who had dominated every academic competition since 6th grade, who was on a first-name basis with every teacher, who spoke like a senator and stood like a soldier. The boy whose speech had been quoted in the school paper before he even delivered it. This wasn't supposed to happen. And yet, there she stood, Amara Thomas, petite, poised, and powerful, her deep brown skin glowing under the stage lights, her eyes wide with gratitude, and a trophy clutched tightly to her chest. Her voice, just minutes ago, had filled the room with the kind of quiet strength that didn't shout to be heard. She had told a story. Not just written words, but truth, her truth, about struggle and sacrifice, about her mother working 2 jobs to raise her and her grandmother marching in Selma, about why her voice mattered, not in spite of who she was, but because of it. And it moved people. Every word. Every pause. Every breath. Even Ethan. Especially Ethan. But instead of honoring that, he walked off. Outside, the evening air slapped his face like reality. Cold and sharp. It stung. But not as much as the feeling building in his chest. Not anger. Not sadness. Something heavier. Something he didn't have a name for. He found himself behind the gymnasium, away from the crowd, where the buzz of victory didn't reach. He leaned against the brick wall and stared at the gravel beneath his feet, jaw clenched so tightly he thought it might crack. He could still hear the applause. Or maybe it was just the echo of it, stuck inside his head like a bad song. It wasn't supposed to end like this. He had done everything right. He'd written and rewritten his speech until the ink smudged on the pages. He'd stood in front of his mirror every night, practicing tone, inflection, posture. His mother had recorded him. His father had drilled him. His coach had told him, "You're the one to beat, Ethan." And he believed it. Not out of arrogance, but out of expectation. He was supposed to win. He always had. So when Amara's name was called, when the crowd erupted not for him but for her, something inside cracked. Not just because he lost, but because she deserved it. That was the worst part. The terrifying, humiliating, undeniable truth. Her words were better. Her delivery was sharper. Her presence, quieter, yes, but impossible to ignore. He hated that he knew it. His phone buzzed in his pocket, over and over. Notifications piling in. He didn't need to look. He already knew. Videos. Clips. People asking, did he just walk off? Wow, really? Not a good look. He was trending, and not in the way he'd ever wanted. A familiar voice broke the silence. Ethan. He turned to see Ms. Callahan, his coach, standing 10 feet away, arms folded gently, her face laced with concern. She stepped forward slowly, cautiously, like approaching a wounded animal. "I just needed some air," he said quickly, as if that explained everything. She nodded, but didn't move. "I know this hurts," she said carefully. "But Ethan, you walked off the stage. That's not just losing. That's quitting. He looked away, his chest tightening. I didn't quit. You didn't stay, either. Her words weren't cruel. They were calm, pointed, and they stuck to his skin like cold rain. He wanted to explain. Wanted to say that it wasn't about her race, or her story, or some political agenda. But then, why hadn't he stayed? Why hadn't he clapped? Why hadn't he looked her in the eyes and said, "Well done"? Because deep down, in the pit of his stomach, he felt something he wasn't ready to name. Something ugly. Something that sounded a lot like jealousy and shame wrapped in fear. Fear that maybe he wasn't the best anymore. Maybe he never was. Ms. Callahan let the silence stretch before she spoke again. You're better than that moment. He didn't answer. She waited a beat, then walked away. When she was gone, Ethan stayed. He stood there under the gray-purple sky as the air cooled further and the parking lot lights flickered on one by one. Inside, the celebration raged. He could hear music now. Laughter. Joy. Not his. For the first time in his life, Ethan didn't feel like the center of the universe. He felt like a shadow. And yet, somehow, he also felt like he was waking up. He didn't understand it. Not fully. But something had cracked open in him, and it wasn't just pride. It was a question. A small, dangerous question: what if this wasn't a mistake? What if I was supposed to lose? What if this moment, this painful, humiliating, gut-wrenching moment, was exactly what I needed to become something more than just the kid who wins? He sat down on the curb, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. Maybe tonight wasn't the end of the story. Maybe tonight was the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Before the trophy, before the speech, before the storming off and the silence, Ethan Miller had always known exactly who he was. In his hometown of Ashland, Virginia, just one of those quiet, sun-baked towns where everybody knew everybody, Ethan had long been seen as a sure thing. The safe bet. The golden boy. He wasn't the fastest athlete or the loudest voice in the room, but when he spoke, people listened. He didn't talk to fill silence, he talked to shape it. Teachers adored him. Coaches respected him. Parents held him up as the example their own kids should follow. It had been that way since elementary school. He was the kid with straight A's and sharp dress shoes, the one who stayed behind after class to stack chairs without being asked. He volunteered at food drives. He led the Pledge of Allegiance every Monday morning. His yearbook was already drafting the phrase, "most likely to be president." But behind the straight posture and polite smile was a boy shaped by pressure, delicate, relentless pressure, applied day after day, year after year, until it formed him into someone who no longer knew how to stop chasing perfection. Most of it came from his father. Mark Miller had served 2 tours overseas, a quiet man with hands like bricks and a stare that cut through noise like a blade. He didn't shout much, he didn't have to. His expectations were loud enough on their own. He called Ethan champ when he did well. He called him soft when he didn't. Praise was rare, and when it came with conditions. "You've got what most people don't," he'd say, leaning back in his recliner, eyes on the evening news. "A spine. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small. Don't lose. Losing's for people who make excuses." Ethan had nodded every time. Took the words in like gospel. His mother, Lisa, was the softer balance, a middle school teacher, endlessly kind but tired around the edges. She wore worry in her smile. Always proud of her son, always supportive, but never able to buffer the weight his father piled onto him. "You don't have to be perfect to be enough," she would sometimes whisper after tense dinner table conversations. But by then, it never seemed to matter. The third pillar in Ethan's world, the only one who seemed to truly understand him, was his grandfather, Walt Miller. A retired librarian and army vet, Walt had a slower way of speaking, like he measured every word before letting it out. He never pushed Ethan. He just asked questions. What did you learn from that speech you gave? What does winning mean to you, not to your father? Are you listening to the words or just saying them pretty? Walt had a way of cutting through things with softness instead of steel. Ethan loved their afternoons together, sitting under the creaky old oak tree behind Walt's house, sipping root beer floats, talking about books, ideas, life. It was the only place Ethan felt like he could stop performing and just be. Still, even Walt had expectations, unspoken, but deeply felt. Ethan carried the family name. The Miller name. That meant something. It meant work. It meant discipline. It meant not folding under pressure. So Ethan never folded. Not when it got hard. Not when he didn't sleep. Not even when he wanted to. But inside, something had started to crack long before the night of the competition. It had started in small ways, when he'd overheard teachers whispering about Amara's talent, about how, she's not just smart, she's real. When his friends, some of them, started reposting her poetry videos on TikTok, calling her next level. When he read her name in the finalist list and felt that knot in his chest, that tiny whisper of fear that said, she might actually beat you. Still, he doubled down. He wrote and rewrote his speech, crafting it to be airtight, crowd-pleasing, inspirational. But it wasn't his story, it was the story he thought they wanted to hear. A little patriotism, a little history, a few practiced pauses for dramatic effect. It was good. Technically excellent. But it wasn't alive. He didn't see that then. But now, after the loss, after the walk-off, after the shame, he couldn't unsee it. The days leading up to the event had been tense. His father had taken off work early just to drill him at the kitchen table. "You think she's gonna hand this to you?" he'd asked, smacking the counter. "You better be ready, Ethan. People want to knock you down just because of who you are. Don't give them the chance." The words hung like smoke in the house. But it wasn't Amara who knocked him down. She didn't need to. All she did was speak from the heart. Ethan still remembered every beat of her speech, every quiet moment that landed like a thunderclap. No shouting. No dramatics. Just raw, honest truth. She had painted pictures with her voice. Of walking to school with a plastic bag over her shoes to keep them clean, of watching her mother cry over unpaid bills, of reading Baldwin under street lamps when the power got cut off. And then she looked up and said, "My voice is not the loudest, but it is mine. And I refuse to let it be silenced." That line hadn't been written for applause. But it got one. A long one. The kind that stung more than any insult ever could. Backstage after the competition, when the crowd had thinned and the streamers had fallen, Ethan sat alone on a folding chair, still in his suit, still clutching the speech he never got to finish reading. Ms. Callahan had found him there, but all he could do was stare at the paper in his hands like it was in a language he no longer understood. He had followed every rule. So why did it feel like she'd told the truth and he'd told a lie? Later that night, at home, his father said nothing. Just turned the TV on louder than usual. His mother touched his shoulder gently, but he pulled away, unsure if he could survive her sympathy. Only Walt called. He didn't say congrats, or I'm sorry. He just asked, "Tell me what it felt like." The moment they called her name. Ethan didn't answer. Not then. Because he didn't know yet how to say the truth. He'd never been taught how to lose. Not like this. By Monday morning, the video had already been shared over 3 million times. Ethan's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. Not just on Twitter, but TikTok, Instagram, Reddit. Everywhere. And not as state speech finalist or valedictorian hopeful. No, he was that kid. The one who stormed off stage when a black girl beat him fair and square. The captions told the story. Privilege caught on camera. How not to take an L. This is what entitlement looks like. Some posts were angry. Some were mocking. Most were cruel. Ethan read too many of them, even though every part of him told him to look away. His speech coach had called twice. He didn't answer. The principal had left a message asking him to come in early. He ignored that too. He stayed home that morning, watching his face loop across feeds and phones, surrounded by millions of strangers who now believed they knew exactly who he was. The boy who couldn't clap for someone else's win. The boy who walked away. And maybe, they weren't wrong. His dad saw the video, of course. Said nothing for a long time. Just stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, eyes tight. Then came the line Ethan had known was coming, "You made us look weak." No mention of how he felt. No question of whether he was okay. Just that, weak. That was worse than any insult. His mom tried. She said maybe it would blow over, that people had short attention spans. That it didn't define him. But Ethan didn't believe that anymore. Not after seeing the look in Amara's eyes when she turned to shake his hand and realized he was gone. It wasn't just that he lost. It was how he lost. And deep down, even through the noise, he knew it. By Tuesday, he dragged himself back to school. He kept his hoodie up as he walked the halls, but the stares followed him anyway. Some people avoided eye contact. Others didn't even try to hide their whispers. Bet he's not used to losing. He's lucky that's all that happened. Talk about fragile ego. He kept his head down. He hadn't talked to Amara yet. He didn't know how. She hadn't posted anything, not a gloat, not a clapback, not even a vague subtweet. She'd stayed silent. Somehow, that made it worse. The restraint. The grace. It made him feel smaller by comparison. He tried to disappear into the background, to survive the day without further damage. But by fourth period, that hope vanished. Ms. Wallace's AP English class was holding a discussion on power and perspective in public speaking. Perfect timing. They were dissecting famous speeches, King's "I Have a Dream," Greta Thunberg's UN address, Amanda Gorman's inaugural poem. Ms. Wallace asked the room, "What makes a message powerful?" A girl in the front row raised her hand. "When it's honest," she said. "When it feels like the person isn't just performing, but actually telling you something that matters to them." Another added, "Also, knowing when to listen is powerful too. Especially when the story being told isn't your story." The class nodded. Ethan sat motionless in the back, pulse in his ears. No one looked at him directly. But they didn't have to. The air was thick. After class, he lingered. As the others filed out, Ms. Wallace stopped beside his desk. "Ethan, can we talk for a minute?" He nodded, bracing for it. But she surprised him. "I know you're going through it," she said, gently. "I also know you care about words. About using them right." He looked up. "You made a mistake. It was public. And it hurt people. But that doesn't have to be the end of your story." He wanted to believe her. Then she added, "But only you get to decide what kind of man you want to be when people are watching, and when they aren't." That line stayed with him all day. By lunch, his appetite was gone. He sat alone under the bleachers behind the gym, the only place no one went unless they were skipping class or hiding. Right now, he was both. He scrolled past more clips. More comments. Then stopped cold. There was a new video. It wasn't him. It was Amara. A classmate had recorded her during a conversation in the library. She was talking to someone softly, not realizing she was being filmed. Her voice was calm. But clear. "I'm not mad at him," she said. I wanted to share something real. And I think I did. That's what matters to me. The person she was talking to asked, but aren't you pissed that he walked off? Amara shook her head. People act out when they feel unseen. That doesn't scare me. I know who I am. Ethan watched the video twice. 3 times. She wasn't mad. She wasn't gloating. She had already moved on. He was the only one still stuck in the moment. And for the first time since that night, he felt something new, not shame, not fear. Resolve. She had stood her ground and told the truth. Maybe it was time he learned how to do the same. Ethan didn't sleep much that week. Not because of the comments, though they still came. Not because of the looks he got in the hallways, or the way teachers now greeted him with forced neutrality. He didn't sleep because for the first time in his life, he didn't know who he was when he wasn't winning. It was like someone had cracked the mirror he used to see himself through, and now all he saw were pieces. But sometimes, broken pieces show you things the full picture never could. Friday came like a slow-moving wave, thick with anticipation. Ethan walked into school with a weight in his chest he couldn't quite explain, but he felt something different today. It wasn't clarity. Not yet. But it was close. Like the fog in his head had thinned just enough to let a few truths in. He didn't know why he stopped at the library. Maybe because it was one of the few places people didn't talk loudly. Or maybe because that video of Amara, the one where she said she wasn't mad, had looped in his head every night since. Either way, he found himself standing outside the glass doors, hands clenched at his sides, heart punching against his ribs. Inside, she sat at one of the back tables, notebook open, earphones in. For a moment, he stood frozen. What was he even going to say? What could he say? Sorry didn't feel big enough. But he wasn't here to be forgiven. He just needed to face what he ran from. He walked in. She looked up. There was a flicker of recognition. A pause. Then she removed one earbud, giving him a neutral look that somehow made him feel even smaller. Hey, he said quietly. She didn't respond. Just waited. He swallowed. Do you mind if I sit? Still nothing. Then finally, a short nod. Not yes. Not no. Just go ahead. He slid into the chair across from her. He hated how shaky his voice sounded. I've been meaning to talk to you. All week. She didn't interrupt. Just watched him. Not with anger. With curiosity. Like she was waiting to see if this was real, or just another performance. I walked off that night because I couldn't handle losing. I thought I could. But I couldn't. Still no response. He pushed forward. It wasn't just the trophy. I think I didn't know who I was without winning. And I watched you go up there and say something real, and I felt like everything I'd worked for wasn't enough anymore. And that scared me. There. Out loud. Finally. Amara blinked. Then leaned back slightly. You didn't walk off because I'm black. Ethan flinched. No. I mean, no. That's not, he caught himself. That's not why I walked off. But maybe that's why it mattered more than I wanted to admit. She raised an eyebrow. I've never had to compete with someone like you, he said, voice low, honest. Not because you weren't there. But because I never saw you. Not really. Silence stretched between them. Then she asked, why now? He didn't hesitate. Because pretending I'm not the villain in this story won't help me change. A breath. Hers, his. Both. She finally closed her notebook. I don't need you to apologize for losing, she said. People lose all the time. What you did was bigger than losing. You disappeared. You erased the moment. For both of us. He nodded slowly. I know. I'm sorry. Truly. She stared at him for a long second. Then nodded once. I believe you. He blinked. You do. Yeah. But I'm not here to give you a redemption arc, Ethan. That's on you. He let out a soft laugh. Fair. They sat in stillness after that, but something had shifted. Not forgiveness. Not friendship. Just a beginning. The door wasn't open, but it wasn't locked anymore. Later that day, Ethan found himself back in Ms. Callahan's office. She looked up from her desk and did a double take. Well, she said, setting her coffee down. The prodigal son returns. He smirked. I deserve that. She gestured for him to sit. What's on your mind? I want to write a new speech. She leaned back. Another competition? No. Just, something real. For me. For school. For whoever wants to listen. She studied him, eyes narrowing slightly. You're not doing this to clean your image, are you? No. I'm doing it to find out who I am when I'm not winning. A pause. Then she smiled, soft, small, proud. Okay. Let's start. And they did. For the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't write to impress. He wrote to uncover. He wrote about fear. About pressure. About learning how to sit in discomfort. He wrote about what it meant to unlearn pride, to listen instead of perform, to stop trying to be right all the time and start being honest. He didn't know where it would take him. Or who would care. But that wasn't the point. For the first time, he didn't need to win. He just needed to speak. No one expected Ethan to step up to the mic at the school assembly. The announcement had gone out earlier that week. An open mic assembly for the entire senior class, a new initiative by the student council titled Voices Week. A chance for anyone to share something that mattered to them. Stories. Truths. Things that didn't fit neatly into GPAs or award plaques. When the sign-up sheet hit the hallways, Ethan's name hadn't been there. People assumed he wouldn't even show. But he did. He sat near the back of the auditorium, hoodie up, heart drumming in a slow panic. One by one, students walked up and spoke. Some read poetry. Some talked about mental health, identity, grief, or family. No one mentioned the competition directly, but its shadow hung over every word. When the MC called his name, Ethan Miller. A low rustle went through the crowd. He stood. He could feel the room lean in, subtle but undeniable. There was tension. Curiosity. Skepticism. Some faces expected an apology tour. Others expected deflection. A few just wanted him to sit back down. He climbed the steps. Gripped the mic. And stood in front of the people who used to call him the best. He looked out, not at Amara, not at the teachers, not even at Ms. Callahan in the back row, but at everyone. All of them. The whole picture. Then he spoke. I used to think my voice was my greatest strength. A few people shifted. Phones came out. The recording had already begun. I thought that if I could just speak better, faster, louder, if I could perform confidence well enough, I'd win. And for a long time, I did. Awards, titles, claps at the end. But what I didn't realize was that I was performing through people, not with them. He paused. The auditorium was silent. 2 weeks ago, I lost to someone who didn't just speak well. She spoke truth. And I didn't know how to handle that. I didn't clap. I didn't shake her hand. I walked off stage like the story was over. But it wasn't. It still isn't. Somewhere, someone let out a quiet breath. He wasn't sure if it was relief or surprise. I didn't walk off stage because I hate losing. I walked off because I couldn't face the fact that someone else's truth deserved more than mine. And that was never about a trophy. He looked toward the crowd, his voice steady now. I'm not here to be forgiven. I'm here to say something I should have said then. Amara, your voice mattered more that night than I let on. You deserve to be celebrated, and I didn't do that. I see you now. I'm listening. A few heads turned in her direction. She sat still, hands in her lap. Listening. I've been taught to speak my mind my whole life. But no one taught me how to sit in silence when someone else's voice needed the floor. That's what I'm learning now. He stepped back from the mic, voice softening. And if you're someone like me, who's been given the mic so many times you started thinking it was yours, maybe now's the time to listen, too. He exhaled and let the silence stretch. Then walked off stage. No dramatic bow. No swagger. Just quiet. There was a long, loaded pause. Then applause. Slow at first, cautious, uncertain, then building. Strong. Real. But this time, Ethan didn't look for the volume. He didn't care who stood or who didn't. He wasn't waiting for approval. He was listening for truth, and it was there, humming underneath the applause, in the breath between claps, in the stillness that followed. Backstage, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned. Amara. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, that was the first time you ever sounded like you weren't trying to win. He let out a breath. Yeah. Felt weird. She smiled, just barely. Keep going. He nodded. Thanks, for giving me space. I didn't give it to you, she said, eyes clear. You took it back with honesty. Then she walked away. And for the first time, Ethan didn't feel like the main character. He felt like a part of something bigger. A conversation. A movement. A shift. He didn't know what tomorrow would look like. Or if everyone would forgive him. Maybe some wouldn't. Maybe some shouldn't. But he had finally stepped toward the truth, no longer hiding behind polished speeches or perfect scores. He had spoken, not to win, not to dominate, but to begin again. And sometimes, that's the only kind of winning that matters. The Monday after the assembly felt different. Not like everything had healed, more like something had cracked open and now people were looking inside. For the first time in weeks, Ethan walked through the halls and didn't feel like a ghost, or worse, a villain. Some kids nodded at him. One girl he didn't even know murmured, "That was brave." A teacher gave him a small thumbs up in the stairwell. It wasn't applause. It was quieter than that. More human. Still, not everyone was moved. At lunch, Ethan sat at a table in the far corner of the cafeteria. His old friend Logan approached cautiously. Logan had been distant since the competition, pulling back into the crowd, not saying much either way. He wasn't the type to stir drama, but he also hadn't defended Ethan when everything fell apart. Now, he stood awkwardly, tray in hand. Mind if I sit? Ethan shrugged. Free country. Logan sat. For a moment, they ate in silence, the kind that used to be easy between them but now felt tight and uncertain. That assembly, Logan said, finally. It was good. Surprising. Ethan nodded slowly. Didn't think I had it in me. Logan gave a half smile. Honestly? I didn't know if you'd ever come back from that. But I guess you did. I'm trying, Ethan said. Still figuring it out. Another pause. Then Logan leaned in, voice quieter. You know, some people think you're doing it for show. Like, a redemption tour. Ethan didn't flinch. Yeah. I figured. You're not, though. Ethan looked him in the eye. If I was, I'd be louder about it. Flashier. This isn't fun. It's just necessary. Logan gave a small nod. Okay. The old bond between them didn't click right back into place, but it didn't collapse either. That was enough for now. That afternoon, something else shifted. Ms. Callahan stopped him after class and handed him a paper. I got a call from Statewide Voices, she said. They want to publish your assembly speech on their blog. Ethan blinked. Wait, what? They saw the video. It's been circulating. Quietly. The right circles. Educators, youth advocates. They think your honesty might help other students talk about failure. Real failure. He stared at the paper in his hands. His name, typed neatly across the top. Below it, the same words he had shakily said on stage now printed, permanent. I don't know if I'm ready to be at the message, he said. She smiled. That's exactly why you're ready. That evening, he walked to his grandfather Walt's house. It was their usual Friday ritual, but this time, Ethan came with something different, silence. They sat on the porch in the fading spring light, the air full of chirping insects and the low hum of traffic in the distance. Walt handed him a bottle of root beer without speaking. You've been quiet, Walt finally said. I think I'm finally learning how to be, Ethan answered. Walt chuckled. Took you long enough. They clinked bottles. You remember what I told you when you were a kid? Walt asked, peering out at the oak tree in the yard. Which part? About what a man does when he realizes he's been wrong. Ethan shook his head. He doesn't defend the mistake. He doesn't pretend it wasn't there. He just stops running from it. Ethan nodded. I stopped. Finally. Walt looked at him with a mix of pride and pain. You know, I served next to men who couldn't admit they were wrong about anything. Not once. They carried that like lead in their blood. But the strongest men I ever knew. They were the ones who said, I didn't see it before, but I see it now. Ethan looked down at the porch wood beneath his feet. I wish I'd seen it sooner. Doesn't matter when. Just that you did. Later that night, as he walked home, Ethan passed the school's community board. Someone had pinned a photo from the assembly. He hadn't seen it before. It showed him standing at the mic, eyes focused, posture nervous but steady. And below it, someone had scribbled, in blue pen. Growth isn't quiet, but it's honest. No name. No attribution. Just truth. And for once, Ethan didn't feel the need to correct or explain or even take credit. He just stood there, looking at a version of himself that wasn't about winning, but about becoming. Amara James had never been afraid of being seen. She'd just grown used to being seen through. It was something she learned early, how to carry excellence like armor. How to sharpen her speech, modulate her tone, sit with poise in rooms where her name was mispronounced, her ideas dismissed, and her intelligence mistaken for luck. She didn't complain. She calculated. She studied people who didn't expect much from her and made it her quiet mission to deliver more than they could handle. But even with all that, especially with all that, she had never been prepared for what happened the night she won. She could still hear the way the auditorium had shifted when Ethan walked off stage. Not gasps, not even full confusion. Just a sudden stillness. Like the crowd wasn't sure how to react. Whether to follow him with their eyes or stay with her at the microphone. For a second, it felt like she had done something wrong. And that's what hurt the most. Not his silence. But the space it took up. That night, she didn't cry. She didn't yell. She went home, made tea, and journaled 5 pages without stopping. Her mother watched her from the doorway, knowing better than to interrupt. Amara had always known what it meant to win in rooms where people didn't expect her to. But this? This was a new lesson, what it meant to win and still be robbed of the moment. The video went viral faster than she expected. Her DMs flooded. Some were kind. Others were toxic. A few people, mostly strangers, urged her to use this moment, as if grief and grace were PR opportunities. She didn't respond to any of them. She didn't post. She didn't explain. Let the silence speak for itself. But silence doesn't mean peace. It just means you're holding everything in your chest until you find a place to release it. That place came a week later, in Ms. Wallace's classroom. It was after school, and Amara had stayed behind to ask for feedback on a college essay. As they wrapped up, Ms. Wallace gently asked, "How are you doing with all this?" Amara didn't pretend not to know what she meant. "I'm tired," she admitted. "Not of Ethan. Just, of what this says about everything else." Ms. Wallace folded her hands, nodding slowly. "Do you want to write about it?" Amara looked at her. "No, I mean really write about it," Ms. Wallace continued. "Not a rebuttal. Not a reaction. Just you, Amara. Your voice, untouched. Maybe for the school paper. Maybe not. Just somewhere. Because what happened to you, this thing people want to label as drama, wasn't personal. It was structural." Amara was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Okay." That night, she sat at her desk, lit only by the soft glow of her reading lamp. She opened her laptop and began typing, slow at first, then faster. The words poured out like water after a drought. People say I should be proud. That I should be loud. But sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is stand still while someone else unravels beside you. I didn't need to win that night to feel powerful. I needed to be allowed to exist in my power without it being diminished by someone else's inability to process that. I've watched people like Ethan win for years, not just trophies, but space. Benefit of the doubt. Second chances. And now that he's learning what failure tastes like, everyone wants to call it a coming-of-age story. What I want to know is, when does my story start? And why is it only interesting when someone else messes up around me? I am not a plot device. I am a person. She saved the file and sent it to Ms. Wallace without a subject line. 2 days later, Ms. Wallace approached her with an offer: publish it in the Senior Spotlight series. It would run unedited. Amara hesitated. "Are you sure they'll print it?" "They'd be fools not to," Ms. Wallace said. "Besides, you're not asking permission. You're offering perspective." When the piece went live, the reaction was immediate. It wasn't angry. It wasn't viral. It was quiet. Reverent. Students stopped her in the hallway and said, "I felt that." One girl whispered, "You put words to something I didn't even know I was feeling." A freshman left a note in her locker that said, "Thank you for being brave first. Now I can try too." And then, one afternoon, a folded piece of paper appeared in her locker. No envelope. Just scrawled handwriting that read, "You're right. I'm still unlearning. But thank you for not waiting for me to catch up before telling your story. E." Amara didn't smile when she read it. She exhaled. She didn't need Ethan to redeem himself. She didn't need anyone to hand her a mic or a moment. She had taken it, carefully and clearly, and filled it with truth that didn't ask for applause. And for once, her silence could rest. Because her voice had already done the work. The first time Ethan and Amara were asked to work together again, they both hesitated, but for very different reasons. Principal Holbrook had seen both of their public reflections, the speech, the essay, and proposed something bold, a student-led assembly on narratives and second chances. He wanted them to co-create it. Not just appear together, but build it together. A program by students, for students. Raw. Unfiltered. Unrehearsed. The invitation came with praise, but also pressure. Amara stared at the email for a full minute before closing her laptop. Ethan read it 3 times before replying, "Sure." Ms. Callahan pulled him aside the next morning. "You sure about this?" He gave a small nod. "It feels like the right kind of uncomfortable." "Good," she said. "That's where growth usually lives." The first planning meeting was held in the school library, neutral territory. Ms. Wallace was there to moderate, but mostly stayed quiet, giving them space. Amara arrived on time, Ethan already seated. They exchanged a short, almost clinical greeting. No warmth. No chill. Just, mutual understanding. Ethan opened his notebook. "So, format. Do we each take a section? Alternate stories?" Amara leaned back. "Or maybe we frame it around a conversation. Like, how we experienced the same night through completely different lenses." He glanced up. "So, like, dual narratives?" "Exactly. You say what you saw. I say what I saw. And then we let the audience sit with that tension." "Tension's a good word for it." She gave a brief smirk. "It usually is." They mapped out an outline. Ethan would begin with his background, what he was taught about winning, about performance, about pressure. Amara would follow with what it meant to navigate excellence without recognition, how silence wasn't always a choice, but a strategy. Then they'd each read from their past reflections, his speech, her essay. Finally, a joint piece. Something unscripted. A real-time conversation about identity, grace, discomfort, and truth. That last part made both of them nervous. As they worked, there were long silences, not hostile, but deliberate. Each sentence was measured. Each question came with invisible weights. "Why did you really walk off?" Amara asked during their second meeting. Ethan looked at her, honesty pressing at his throat. "Because it felt like everything I believed about myself fell apart. And I blamed you because you were the proof." "Proof of what?" "That I wasn't the only voice that mattered." She nodded once. "That's the part people don't admit. You think I'm still performing? I think you're still peeling." The words landed hard, but true. Ethan didn't argue. After the third session, as they packed up their bags, Amara paused near the door. "You know," she said quietly, "I almost didn't submit that essay." He turned. "Why not?" "Because I didn't want to be part of your redemption story. I didn't want to be the girl who forgave you so you could grow." Ethan's face tightened. "And now?" She hesitated. "Then, now I think, this story might be about both of us becoming real in front of other people. Not for each other. For ourselves." He nodded. "That's fair." The week before the assembly, they held a dress rehearsal in the auditorium. Just the two of them and their teachers. They took the stage. No spotlight. No audience yet. Just 2 chairs and a pair of microphones. Amara opened with her story, slow, precise, full of the kind of truths that didn't ask for sympathy, only understanding. Ethan followed, nervous, stripped down, but honest. Then came the final segment. The unscripted talk. Ethan took a breath. "When do you feel most unseen?" Amara didn't flinch. "When people call me strong instead of right." She looked at him. "You?" "When people cheer for my vulnerability but forget the harm that came before it." Their words hung in the space like fog after a storm, thick, but clearing. From the back row, Ms. Wallace wiped at her eyes. And somewhere in the shadows, Ms. Callahan whispered, "This is bigger than the stage now." As they stepped down from the platform, something had changed. Not friendship. Not closure. But mutual clarity, the knowledge that both of their voices carried weight, and when placed side by side, they didn't cancel each other out. They amplified. The day of the assembly arrived, and the air in the school was electric with anticipation. For once, Ethan wasn't the one everyone was watching. The spotlight was now on the collaboration between him and Amara, something no one had seen coming. There was talk in the halls. A buzz of curiosity mixed with excitement. People were wondering how they could possibly make peace with what had happened between them, let alone share the stage. As Amara and Ethan walked into the auditorium side by side, the atmosphere felt different. A sense of unity had replaced the tension, but there was still something raw in the air, an undercurrent of doubt that neither could ignore. The lights dimmed, and the crowd quieted as the opening video rolled, clips from their speeches, snippets of the reactions from the competition. Both Ethan and Amara appeared on screen, their faces frozen in the moments before everything fell apart. Then, the video cut to black, and they stood before the audience, alone with just their words and their truth. Ethan cleared his throat. "Thank you for being here." Amara nodded beside him. "Thank you for listening. This isn't just our story. It's everyone's." They launched into the first part, as planned, Ethan's background, the expectations he'd grown up with. He spoke about competition, how his whole life had been shaped by the need to win. "In my mind," he said, "there was no space for second place. Winning meant everything, even if it meant hurting someone else to get there." Amara's turn came next. She spoke with a steady confidence, no notes, no hesitation. "Winning," she said, "has never been a luxury I was afforded. But I learned that being overlooked doesn't make you invisible. It makes you stronger. I don't need recognition for my strength. I carry it, whether you see it or not." The crowd was silent, listening to every word. It was clear that both of them had laid themselves bare in front of the room, and that rawness was reaching people. Then came the unscripted part, the part that would either make or break everything. Ethan turned to Amara, the weight of their shared history between them. "When was the first time you realized you weren't just playing the game?" he asked. Amara's eyes softened. "When I stopped looking for someone else's approval. When I understood that my journey didn't need anyone's permission." Ethan nodded slowly. "I think I'm still trying to get there." "I think we all are," Amara replied, a small but genuine smile tugging at her lips. The audience was rapt. They were listening, really listening. And then, in the back of the auditorium, there was a shift. At the back of the room, just behind the middle row, a voice rose. It wasn't loud at first, but it was clear enough for the front rows to catch the tail end of it. "That's easy for you to say, Amara." Ethan turned toward the voice, his heart skipping a beat. He recognized the face. It was Jordan Henson, a kid who had always flown under the radar but had a way of drawing attention when he wanted to. He was one of those kids who wasn't especially involved, but always had an opinion, always had something to say. Usually, it was something dismissive. Amara stiffened but didn't flinch. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone measured. Jordan stood up, leaning forward slightly. "You make it sound like you're some kind of superhero for getting through life unnoticed. But the truth is, you chose that. People like you don't get to act like you've been held back when you're playing it safe from the start." The room went quiet, tension crackling like electricity. Amara took a deep breath before answering. "I didn't choose to be overlooked, Jordan. I chose to survive." Jordan scoffed. "Yeah, well, some of us have to work twice as hard to be heard. You get a few minutes of fame and think it's all about your voice, but you're missing the point. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the real world." Ethan's pulse quickened, but he knew this wasn't his fight. This was Amara's. She didn't back down. "The real world doesn't work for everyone. Not the way you think it does. Sometimes it doesn't matter how hard you work. It matters who's willing to listen." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Jordan's face reddened, but instead of shouting back, he sat down. He didn't leave, but his posture was closed off, arms crossed tightly. He wasn't done, he would just wait for another opportunity. Amara and Ethan continued, but the energy in the room had shifted. The questions were no longer about their message. They were about their worthiness to deliver it. When the assembly ended, the students filed out slowly, murmuring among themselves. The air felt thick with tension. Ethan glanced at Amara, unsure of how to address what had just happened. She caught his eye, then looked away, clearly unsettled. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded, though her expression didn't match the answer. "I'm fine. Just tired of explaining myself." They stood there for a moment, the weight of Jordan's interruption hanging between them. Then, Amara let out a soft breath. "That wasn't about me. It was never about me." Ethan didn't respond immediately, but as he looked at her calm, centered presence, he understood. That wasn't about her. It wasn't even about him. It was about something deeper, something neither of them could control. The crowd had responded with silence. But that silence wasn't the absence of understanding, it was the beginning of understanding. The day after the assembly, the halls felt different. It wasn't that the school had changed overnight, but rather that Amara and Ethan were now inextricably tied to something bigger than themselves. Their message, their shared stage, their vulnerability, these things had stirred something in the air. The silent reactions, the murmurs that followed them through the hallways, felt like a weight they could no longer ignore. But what really hit Amara was the lingering silence. The uncomfortable kind. The kind that wasn't born out of understanding, but out of confusion. Jordan Henson's interruption had left a mark that neither of them could erase. While some students had nodded in agreement with Amara, others, especially those who hadn't fully listened, started to feel uncomfortable. Jordan had forced a question to the surface: who were they really speaking for? Amara spent the morning in a haze, moving through her classes without fully engaging. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Jordan's words. "People like you don't get to act like you've been held back." It hurt. Not because it was true, but because it wasn't. And yet, in the chaos of their discussion, she couldn't shake the feeling that maybe Jordan had, for a brief moment, pointed to something she hadn't yet fully processed. The phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Ethan. "Hey, can we talk?" She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she sat down on the steps outside the cafeteria, trying to sort through her emotions. How could she explain this feeling? That after all they'd said, after all the vulnerability they'd shared, something still didn't sit right? Finally, she typed back. "Sure. Where?" A minute later, the response came. "The art room after school." "I'll wait." She shoved her phone into her pocket and walked to her next class, the rest of the day dragging along like a slow, uncomfortable crawl. The afternoon bell rang, and Amara walked to the art room. She didn't know exactly what she expected to find, maybe Ethan, still processing his own discomfort. Maybe a quiet confrontation about Jordan. But what she found was Ethan standing by the window, staring out at the empty field. He looked smaller somehow, less confident, and for the first time since they'd started working together, Amara felt that distance, that reminder that their alliance was fragile. "You okay?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. He turned, offering a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah. Just thinking. About the assembly?" She leaned against the doorframe. He nodded, then turned back to the window. "About Jordan. About what happened after." He hesitated. "I should have said something. Defended you." Amara shrugged. "I don't need you to defend me. I didn't want you to, anyway." Ethan finally looked at her, his brows furrowed. "Then why does it feel like you're still angry?" "Because I am," she admitted. "But not for the reasons you think." Ethan stepped toward her, his tone serious now. "What do you mean?" "I'm angry because I didn't expect that from him. I didn't expect someone from our class to turn on me like that. To act like my whole experience was just some personal choice." Amara crossed her arms, the words coming faster than she could control. Jordan's right about one thing, some of us are still fighting battles you'll never understand. And it's frustrating. But I don't want to be some poster child for struggle either. I don't want to be seen as just the girl who overcomes. Ethan processed her words slowly. So, what? You just want to be seen. Not seen. Understood, she corrected. I want people to get it, not just feel sorry for me or pat me on the back like my story's some lesson for everyone else. Ethan stood there, shifting uncomfortably. I get it. But do you think anyone can really get it? I mean, can anyone ever understand what it feels like unless they've lived it? We can't just expect people to know, can we? Amara was quiet for a long time, considering his words. Finally, she spoke softly. No. Maybe not. But they can at least try. They can start by listening. Ethan looked down at his shoes, the weight of her words settling over him. I don't know how to fix it, he said finally. Maybe I don't need to. Amara met his gaze. You don't. But maybe it's not about fixing it. Maybe it's about recognizing it, and being okay with not having all the answers. Maybe we're both learning what it means to show up, even when we don't know what that looks like. The room was silent again, but this time it wasn't the uncomfortable silence that came from confusion. It was the kind of quiet that came with understanding, fragile, tentative, but real. After a moment, Ethan nodded. I'm sorry. For not seeing it before. Amara smiled, but it wasn't a big smile. It was a quiet, acknowledging smile. You don't need to apologize. Just, show up. That's enough. And for the first time in a while, Amara felt like she had taken a step forward, not just in her journey, but in understanding Ethan's, too. They stood in that space for a while, no more words needed between them. They didn't have all the answers, and maybe they never would. But in that moment, they had each other's understanding. And sometimes, that was all you could ask for. The whispers started a few days after the assembly. At first, it was just background noise, students in the halls, muttering under their breath, some talking excitedly about what they had seen, others unsure of how to process it. But as the week wore on, those whispers turned into something more palpable. The students who had been silent before now started showing up in odd groups, eyes flickering nervously whenever Amara or Ethan passed by. And then, at lunch on a Friday afternoon, it happened. Amara was at her usual table, the one by the window, trying to focus on her book. She was used to the stares, the hushed tones, but this was different. It was like the energy in the cafeteria had shifted, and the space around her felt suddenly tight, as though the walls themselves were closing in. You're Amara, right? The voice was unfamiliar, sharp but not unkind. Amara looked up, her eyes meeting the gaze of a girl standing near her table. She was tall, with short hair and an expression that was a little too neutral, as if she were hiding something behind her smile. Yeah, I'm Amara, she replied cautiously, closing her book. She hadn't seen the girl before. New student. Transfer. I'm Kennedy, the girl said, pulling out a chair and sitting down across from her without waiting for permission. I wanted to talk about the assembly. You were really brave. Amara raised an eyebrow. Thanks, I guess. You were at the assembly? Kennedy nodded, her eyes flickering to the side as if making sure no one else was listening. Yeah. I was. But I'm not really here to talk about the assembly. I'm here because I know something about your, past. The words hung between them like a dropped stone. Amara felt the color drain from her face. She clenched her fists under the table, forcing herself to stay calm. What do you mean? Kennedy leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I know who you used to be. Before you moved here. For a moment, Amara couldn't breathe. She had worked so hard to put her past behind her, to erase the pain of it, to carve out a new identity in this town. She didn't want anyone from back home finding out what she had gone through. She certainly didn't want people to know the whole story, the things she'd kept locked away. "You don't know anything," Amara snapped, her voice colder than she intended. Kennedy didn't flinch. "I don't need to know the whole story. I know enough to know that it's something, and I think it might be something you don't want people to find out." Amara stood up, her hands trembling. "You don't know anything about me. You don't get to come in here and—" "Amara," Kennedy said, cutting her off. "I'm not here to make your life worse. I just want you to understand that people have their ways of finding things out. And right now, you're putting yourself in a position where everything can unravel. You're not as untouchable as you think." The words hit Amara like a slap. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. What was she talking about? What did Kennedy know? And how could she possibly know anything about the things she had buried so deeply? "I don't know what you think you know," Amara said, trying to steady her voice, "but if you think you can control me or my life, you're wrong. So, if you don't mind, I'd rather not talk to you anymore." Kennedy didn't leave immediately. She lingered for a few more moments, as though weighing whether she should say something else. "Just think about what I said," she replied before standing up and walking away. Amara watched her go, her mind racing. What did she know? Later that day, as the bell rang to dismiss school, Amara found Ethan waiting for her by the lockers. His face was drawn, a look of concern shadowing his features. "You okay?" he asked, noticing the tightness in her jaw. "I don't know. I think I might have just made a huge mistake," she said, her voice tight. She quickly recounted the interaction with Kennedy, how the girl had alluded to knowing things about her past that she wasn't ready to face. Ethan frowned. "Do you think she's telling the truth?" "I don't know. She definitely knows something, but I don't know what. And I don't want to find out." Amara felt a knot form in her stomach. "I can't go back there. I left that life behind." "I get that," Ethan said softly. "But what if the past is just coming for you? Not because it wants to ruin you, but because it wants to be seen?" Amara shook her head. "I can't let it. Not now. Not when things are starting to make sense here." Ethan nodded. He didn't have an answer for her, but he understood the weight of what she was feeling. Maybe it's time to confront it. Head on. You can't keep running from something like that. Amara didn't respond right away. She didn't know if she was ready. She didn't know if she ever would be. That night, as she lay in bed, her thoughts refused to settle. Kennedy's words echoed in her mind, "You're not as untouchable as you think." Amara turned over and stared at the ceiling, unable to escape the sense that something was coming for her, and this time, it might be too big to outrun. The next morning, as the school day began, Amara received another message, this one from Kennedy. It was brief, but the words were like a warning shot across the bow. "I'm not going to drag you down, but you need to be careful. There are people who remember. And they're not as forgiving as you think." The air in the hallways felt even heavier now, like the world was about to tip over and she wasn't sure which way it would fall. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The next few days felt like walking through a fog. Amara couldn't shake the heaviness that settled in her chest after Kennedy's cryptic warning. The message, simple as it was, had set off a chain reaction in her mind. The girl had made it clear, the past she'd fought so hard to bury wasn't done with her. It was just waiting, patiently, for the right moment to rise again. And Amara could feel that moment creeping closer. She didn't know how much Kennedy knew, but she could tell the girl was just a messenger, there was something much bigger lurking in the background. But what? And why now? Amara hadn't responded to the message. She didn't want to acknowledge it, didn't want to give it any power. Instead, she focused on getting through the days, keeping her head down, and distracting herself with her classes. She spent extra time in the library, pretending the weight of it all didn't exist, even though every corner of the school seemed to be watching her. Ethan, on the other hand, was getting increasingly frustrated. He could see it in her eyes, the way she pulled away from him a little more each day. He had tried to talk to her, to offer support, but every time he reached out, she'd retreat. It wasn't like Amara to shut him out. They'd always been able to talk about anything, but now, there was a wall between them. On Thursday, Ethan couldn't take it any longer. He found Amara in the art room, working on a sketch for one of her upcoming assignments. She was focused, her pencil moving swiftly across the paper, but there was something about her, an energy in the room that didn't sit right. Ethan stood by the door, watching her for a moment before stepping inside. "Amara," he called softly. She didn't look up, but her hand faltered mid-stroke. "I'm busy, Ethan." He wasn't going to let her brush him off this time. He walked over to the desk and placed his hand on top of hers, stopping her from continuing her work. "Amara, stop. You've been shutting me out all week. What's going on?" For a long time, she didn't respond. She stared at the sketch in front of her, the lines on the paper seeming to blur as her eyes watered. Ethan's heart clenched. He could see it now, whatever she was hiding, it was breaking her from the inside out. "I'm scared," she whispered, the words barely audible. Ethan knelt beside her, his hand still resting on hers. "What are you scared of?" Amara let out a shaky breath. "The past. It's catching up to me, Ethan. I don't know how to stop it. I don't know if I can." Ethan's grip tightened, but he didn't speak. He waited for her to continue. "I thought I had outrun it," she continued, her voice trembling. "When I moved here, I thought I could start fresh. But now, with Kennedy, with everything, I don't know if that's even possible." Ethan finally spoke, his voice gentle but insistent. "Amara, we can figure this out. Together. You don't have to do this alone." Amara wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. "I can't drag you into this, Ethan. This is my mess, not yours." "You're not dragging me anywhere," he said firmly. "You're not alone in this. You never have been." For a moment, Amara was quiet, just absorbing his words. She had been so focused on pushing him away, so determined to protect him from the storm she felt coming, that she hadn't stopped to realize how much he truly cared. Ethan wasn't just her partner in this school project, they had become something more over the months. They had built a trust that was unspoken but solid. Finally, she met his eyes. "I don't know what Kennedy knows, but it's enough to make me feel like everything is going to fall apart." "Then we'll make sure it doesn't," Ethan said, his voice steady. "We'll deal with it together. But you have to tell me what happened." "I can't help if I don't know what we're up against." Amara took another breath, steeling herself. She knew this was the moment. She had been avoiding this conversation for too long, and now, she had to face it, head on. "I used to live in a different place. A town where no one cared about me, where people knew me for things I wish they hadn't. Things that still haunt me," she said, her voice faltering. She stood up, pacing across the room. "When I left, I thought I could put it all behind me. But now, it feels like it's catching up with me. Like it's been waiting for the right moment to come back." Ethan stood and walked over to her. "What happened? What are you talking about?" Amara stopped pacing and turned to face him. "I was different back then. I wasn't like I am now. I made mistakes, Ethan. Big ones. I hurt people I shouldn't have. And now, I think they're starting to come for me." Ethan's face softened, but he didn't back away. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it. You don't have to face this alone." For the first time in days, Amara felt a small sliver of hope. Maybe they could get through this. Maybe together, they could stop whatever was coming from tearing her down. But then, the door to the art room swung open. Both Amara and Ethan turned, startled. Standing in the doorway was none other than Kennedy. "Amara," she said, her voice smooth but dripping with something that felt too close to pity. "I think we need to talk. Before things go any further." Amara's blood ran cold. She had hoped she could hold the past back, that she could keep it buried. But now, standing there with Kennedy in front of her, Amara realized that there was no hiding from the truth anymore. Amara's heart raced as Kennedy stood in the doorway of the art room, her eyes sharp and calculating. Ethan moved closer to Amara, his hand brushing against hers in an unspoken promise of support. Amara knew this wasn't just another random encounter. Kennedy had come for something. She wasn't here to befriend her. "What do you want, Kennedy?" Amara asked, trying to keep her voice steady, but the unease was unmistakable in her tone. Kennedy's lips curled into a small smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, I think you know exactly what I'm here for," she said smoothly, stepping inside the room and shutting the door behind her. "You've been running from this for so long, Amara. But now, the time has come for you to face it." Amara swallowed hard, her mind racing. What is she talking about? "I'm not sure I understand," Amara said, her voice betraying the uncertainty she felt. "Face what?" Kennedy's smile deepened. She walked over to the desk, leaning casually against it, her posture relaxed but her eyes intense. "You know what I mean. Your past. The things you thought you could escape just by changing schools. But let me tell you something, you can't outrun who you really are." Ethan stepped forward, his protective instincts kicking in. "What exactly are you trying to say, Kennedy?" Kennedy raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by his involvement. "I'm saying that Amara's past is catching up with her. And she can't keep pretending like it's all behind her. She's not untouchable. No one is." Amara's stomach churned, but she refused to let Kennedy see how much her words affected her. "I don't need you to tell me who I am," she said, her voice sharper now, though still filled with a thread of fear she couldn't completely mask. "Oh, but you do," Kennedy countered, her tone laced with a dangerous calm. "Because the truth is, you don't even know who you really are anymore, do you? You've buried so much of yourself, Amara, and you're so desperate to fit into this new life you've created, but it's not going to last. I'm here to make sure of that." Amara felt a chill wash over her. "What do you want, Kennedy? If you're trying to scare me, it's not working." Kennedy let out a soft laugh. "It's not about scaring you, Amara. It's about forcing you to deal with the consequences of the life you've tried to run from. You can't hide forever. The truth always comes out, and trust me, people are going to start asking questions." Ethan's brow furrowed, his protective instincts flaring. "What exactly are you threatening here?" Kennedy's smile faded, replaced by something colder. "I'm not threatening anything. I'm just here to give Amara a choice. She can either confront the truth, or she can keep running and watch her entire world crumble around her." Amara could feel the pressure building in the room, and she knew that the situation had just escalated to something far beyond her control. She had tried to ignore the past, to pretend that moving here was a clean slate. But Kennedy wasn't going to let her forget. The weight of her words hung in the air, suffocating. "I don't know what you think you know about me, Kennedy," Amara said, her voice shaking with a mixture of frustration and fear, "but you're wrong. You don't have all the pieces. You don't know what I've been through, what I've had to fight for." Kennedy's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Amara saw something dangerous flash in them, something that made her step back instinctively. "I know enough, Amara. Enough to know that you can't keep running forever. Eventually, the past comes knocking." Amara's chest tightened. Was this it? Was this the moment when everything she had fought for would come crashing down? She could feel the panic rising in her throat, but she didn't want to show it. Not in front of Kennedy. Not in front of Ethan. But Ethan wasn't about to let Amara go through this alone. He stood taller, his voice firm as he addressed Kennedy. If you're trying to get under Amara's skin, it's not working. We'll deal with whatever you think you know. But don't think for a second that you can control her. You can't. Kennedy's lips twisted into a knowing smile, but she didn't argue. You're right, she said, her voice low. You can deal with it. Or you can let it destroy you. It's your choice, Amara. With that, Kennedy turned and walked toward the door, pausing only to glance over her shoulder one last time. You'll see. The truth always finds its way out. As the door clicked shut behind her, Amara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She felt like she had been underwater and finally emerged for air. But the relief was short-lived. The words Kennedy had spoken echoed in her mind, reverberating with the same uncomfortable truth she had been avoiding for so long. The truth always finds its way out. Ethan reached for her, his hand gently brushing against her arm. Amara, he said softly. What's going on? What's she talking about? What is it that she knows? Amara swallowed hard, her throat dry. She stared at Ethan for a long moment, trying to find the right words. How could she explain what had happened in her past without falling apart? How could she make him understand the pain she had carried with her for so long? She started, her voice shaking. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know if I can. Ethan's eyes softened, and he stepped closer, his presence grounding her. You don't have to explain everything right now. But whatever it is, you don't have to carry it alone anymore. We're in this together, Amara. Whatever comes, we'll face it. Together. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that they could handle whatever was coming, but the fear gnawing at her heart told her otherwise. She had spent so long trying to outrun the ghosts of her past, and now, they were back. And this time, they weren't going away. I'll tell you, Amara said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll tell you everything. But not today. Not yet. I need to be sure first. I need to know that I can face it, without losing everything. Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. Whenever you're ready, I'm here. We'll do it when you're ready. Amara barely slept that night. The weight of everything that had been said, the things Kennedy had implied, kept her wide awake, her mind racing in circles. She had always known that she couldn't outrun the truth forever, but that didn't make it any easier to face. It had been so much easier to hide, to focus on school, to lose herself in the art room or in her chemistry labs. But now, the past was breathing down her neck, threatening to consume her. She had a sinking feeling that the moment she opened up to Ethan, everything would change. Would he see her as the person she once was? Would he think less of her? Or worse, would he walk away, unable to carry the burden of her history? Ethan, though, had been unwavering. He had been a constant presence, someone who never asked questions about her past but simply supported her. Still, Amara couldn't shake the fear that the moment she spoke the truth, the fragile trust they'd built would crumble. It was one thing to share a friendship, even a love that had begun to grow. But this was different. This was the raw, ugly truth. As the sun began to rise, casting long shadows across her bedroom, Amara felt a sudden, sharp pull in her chest. She knew what she had to do. She could no longer hide from what had happened. She needed to face it, and more importantly, she needed to face Ethan. The phone buzzed on her bedside table, breaking the silence of her thoughts. She reached for it and saw a message from Kennedy. Meet me at the old gym. 3 p.m. If you don't come, I'll make sure the whole school knows. You'll regret it. The message was short but packed with enough venom to freeze her in place. The weight of Kennedy's threat pressed down on her chest. The old gym. That was where everything had happened. That was where her past had begun to unravel. Amara's fingers trembled as she typed out a response. I'll be there. She stared at the screen for a long moment, willing herself to be strong. This is it. This is the moment she had been dreading for so long. She had no choice now but to confront it all, the lies, the shame, the mistakes she had made. And if she didn't, Kennedy would make sure everyone knew. The school day seemed to drag on forever. Amara's mind was elsewhere, her attention shattered as she tried to focus on her classes. Ethan had asked her if she was okay a few times, but each time, she just nodded and offered a weak smile, too scared to tell him the truth. She wasn't ready to have that conversation yet. She wasn't sure if she'd ever be. When the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Amara gathered her things quickly. Ethan was waiting for her by the door, his expression full of concern. "Are you sure you're all right?" he asked, his voice soft but insistent. "You've been quiet all day. If you want to talk." "I'm fine," Amara interrupted, her words coming out a little too sharply. "I just have some stuff to take care of." Ethan didn't press her, but the way he looked at her, eyes searching, worried, told her everything she needed to know. He knew something was off, but he was giving her space. He was letting her decide when and if she was ready to talk. "I'll be here if you need me," he said, his tone gentle, and for the first time that day, Amara felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could make it through this. She forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thanks, Ethan. I'll be okay." As she left the classroom, her feet felt like they were dragging with every step. She had an hour before she needed to meet Kennedy, and that time felt like an eternity. Amara made her way to the old gym, a place she hadn't been to since she had left that town behind. The rusting metal doors of the gym seemed like they were mocking her as she approached. It was the same gym, the same place where everything had started. The air felt heavy, thick with the memories of what had happened here. When she pushed open the doors, she wasn't sure what she expected to see. But it wasn't this. The gym was dimly lit, the floor covered in dust and the air thick with the musty smell of decay. Kennedy was standing in the center, her back to Amara as she looked out over the empty bleachers. For a moment, Amara hesitated, but then Kennedy turned, a cold smile playing on her lips. "You came," Kennedy said, her voice echoing in the vast space. "I wasn't sure if you would. You always were good at running." Amara clenched her fists, fighting the urge to lash out. She had to stay calm. This was it. There was no turning back now. "I'm here," Amara said quietly. "What do you want from me, Kennedy?" Kennedy stepped forward, her shoes tapping against the floor with an almost mocking rhythm. "What do I want? I want the truth. You've been running from it for so long, but now it's time for you to own up to what you did. You can't hide anymore." Amara's throat tightened. The truth. She had known it was coming, but hearing it from Kennedy's lips made it feel like a knife in her side. She swallowed hard, her mind racing to find the right words. "I didn't have a choice back then," Amara said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I made mistakes, but I didn't know what else to do. I was scared. I didn't know how to fix things." Kennedy's eyes darkened, and she took a step closer. "You think that's an excuse? You think that's going to make everything okay?" Amara's chest tightened as she tried to hold herself together. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Kennedy. I'm not asking for anyone's. But I'm done running." The silence that followed was thick, and for a moment, it felt like the weight of everything she had been carrying had finally come to a head. Kennedy stared at her, and for a second, Amara thought she might actually see something other than anger in her eyes, something softer, maybe even understanding. But then Kennedy shook her head, and that softness vanished. "You'll regret this, Amara. You can't outrun your past forever. Everyone's going to know." Amara stood tall, her heart pounding in her chest, but there was something else rising in her, the beginnings of strength. She wasn't going to let Kennedy control her anymore. She wasn't going to let the past define her. I'm not afraid of the truth, Kennedy. I'm done letting it haunt me. So, go ahead. Tell everyone. Let them know. But you won't break me. Kennedy's expression flickered for just a moment, and then, as if she had made up her mind, she gave a short, mocking laugh. We'll see about that. With a final glance, Kennedy turned and walked out, leaving Amara standing alone in the gym. As the door slammed shut behind her, Amara felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. She had faced the truth. And no matter what came next, she wasn't going to let it tear her down. Amara's hands trembled as she walked back to her car, the weight of everything she had just said, and everything Kennedy had threatened, still pressing down on her chest. She had thought that facing Kennedy would bring some kind of closure, but all it had done was open a new door to a world she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The gym doors had slammed behind Kennedy, and Amara had stayed there for a long moment, just breathing. She wasn't sure if she felt relieved, terrified, or both. But one thing was for certain, her world was about to change, and there was no turning back now. As she slid into the driver's seat of her car, her phone buzzed on the passenger seat, the screen lighting up with an incoming message. It was from Ethan. Where are you? Are you okay? Please text me back. Amara didn't know how to answer. She wasn't sure if she was okay. She wasn't sure if she was ready to talk yet, either. The weight of Kennedy's words, everyone's going to know, lingered in her mind like a haunting echo. What if people found out? What if Ethan found out? Could he still look at her the same way? She stared at the message for what felt like an eternity before she typed a quick reply. I'm okay. I just need some time. I'll talk to you soon. She sent it before she could think twice, the words feeling inadequate as soon as they left her fingers. But there was nothing else she could say. Nothing else she could do. Amara started the car, her heart racing as she drove through the empty streets. The world felt too quiet, too still. Everything she had been hiding from was now catching up to her, and she didn't know if she was strong enough to handle it. She tried to convince herself that facing the truth, admitting what she had done, would somehow set her free. But the fear gnawed at her. She wasn't just worried about how others would see her. She was worried about how she would see herself. The past had a way of coming back, even when you least expected it. The next day at school was nothing short of suffocating. The moment Amara stepped into the hallways, she could feel the weight of every whisper, every glance. The air seemed thicker, like everyone knew something she didn't. She could hear the low murmur of voices as she walked past groups of students, their eyes flicking to her before quickly looking away. But it wasn't the normal high school gossip. No, this was different. It was the kind of silence that screamed with tension. She caught sight of Kennedy from across the hallway, talking with a group of students near the lockers. Kennedy's eyes flicked over to Amara, and for just a moment, their gazes locked. Amara didn't look away. She couldn't afford to. She needed to stand her ground. Kennedy smirked, clearly pleased with whatever game she was playing. Amara's stomach twisted into knots, but she didn't let herself flinch. When Amara arrived at her locker, she found a crumpled note shoved between the pages of her textbooks. She unfolded it quickly, her heart beating faster with each passing second. It's only a matter of time before they all find out. You can't keep your past a secret forever. Everyone will know. The question is, what will you do when they come for you? The words felt like a punch in the gut. There it was again, the threat, the fear that had been haunting her for weeks. Kennedy was right. The truth was out there. And it wasn't just her secret anymore. Amara shoved the note into her bag, trying to steady her breathing. She needed to focus. She needed to hold it together. As the bell rang, signaling the start of the next class, Amara hurried to her seat. Her mind was a whirlwind, but the moment she stepped into the classroom, her eyes landed on Ethan, who was sitting at the back, his gaze immediately locking with hers. For a second, it felt like time had stopped. The noise around her faded, and all she could hear was the steady beat of her own heart. She wanted to go to him, to tell him everything, to finally let him in on the truth. But something held her back. The fear of how he might react, what he might think of her, kept her rooted in place. Ethan, however, didn't wait for her to come to him. As soon as the class started, he stood and walked to her side of the room, his expression concerned but soft. "Amara," he said quietly, making sure no one else could hear, "are you sure you're okay? You've been acting distant." Amara opened her mouth to respond, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she explain everything to him? How could she tell him that her past was catching up with her, that Kennedy was holding her life hostage? I just need to figure things out," she managed to say, though the lie tasted bitter in her mouth. "I'm not really sure what's going on." Ethan didn't seem convinced, but he nodded, his eyes still full of worry. "If you need me, I'm here. Don't shut me out, Amara. You don't have to go through this alone." His words hit her like a wave, and for a brief moment, she felt like she might break. She wanted so badly to tell him everything. To tell him how much she was struggling, how scared she was. But the fear was still too strong. As the class went on, Amara tried to focus, but every time she looked over at Ethan, her heart ached. She knew he wanted to help, but how could he? How could anyone help her when she didn't even know how to help herself? That afternoon, Amara found herself alone in the school library, the soft hum of quiet conversation and the rustling of pages around her. She sat in a corner booth, her textbook spread out in front of her, though she wasn't reading. She couldn't concentrate. Her phone buzzed again, this time a message from an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened it. "You can't hide forever. You'll be exposed soon enough. Just remember, I'm watching you." Amara's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just Kennedy anymore. Whoever this was, this nameless, faceless person, was determined to destroy her. The walls were closing in, and there was nowhere to run. She slammed the phone down on the table, the sound of it hitting the wood echoing in the otherwise silent room. Her mind was spinning. She had to stop this. She couldn't let them win. She couldn't let her past ruin everything she'd worked for. But how? What could she possibly do to take control of a situation that felt so far beyond her? For the first time since this nightmare began, Amara wasn't sure if she could fight back. But she knew one thing for certain: if she didn't fight, she would lose everything. And that was something she couldn't live with. Amara sat at the corner of the school library, her textbooks abandoned in front of her. The light outside was dimming, signaling the approach of evening, but she didn't notice. Her mind was far away, racing, spinning with thoughts of everything that had been happening since Kennedy had confronted her. The text from the mysterious number still burned in her mind, each word a warning, a threat. The message had been clear: you can't hide forever. You'll be exposed soon enough. Just remember, I'm watching you. Whoever was behind that message was determined to make her life miserable. She hadn't even been able to tell Ethan what was going on. How could she explain everything? How could she tell him that the lies, the mistakes, were about to come crashing down on her? The weight of keeping everything hidden was growing too heavy. Every time she looked at Ethan, she felt like she was betraying him with every second that passed without telling him the truth. But what was the truth, really? What could she say? How could she explain the things she'd done, the choices she had made that had led her to this moment? Her phone buzzed again, breaking her thoughts. It was from Ethan. "Amara, I'm really worried about you. I know you're not telling me something. Please let me help. Don't shut me out." She read the message 3 times, and each time, her stomach sank. She wanted to tell him, but she couldn't. Not yet. Why can't I just tell him the truth? She whispered to herself, running her hands through her hair. The soft rustling of the pages from the students around her seemed to fade, replaced by the sound of her heartbeat pounding in her ears. A wave of exhaustion swept over her. She felt like she was drowning in this web of lies and fear, and she wasn't sure how to break free. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a message. It was a call. Unknown number. Her pulse quickened. Amara hesitated for a moment before answering, her breath shallow as she pressed the phone to her ear. Hello. A cold, familiar voice answered on the other end, sending a shiver down her spine. You're running out of time, Amara. Kennedy's voice was low, calculated. It's only a matter of time before everyone finds out. You'll be exposed, and you'll have nowhere to hide. Amara felt her body stiffen, her grip on the phone tightening. What do you want from me, Kennedy? She demanded, her voice a little shakier than she intended. Oh, I don't want anything. Kennedy's voice was smooth, like honey, but there was an unmistakable bite to it. I'm just here to remind you that the truth has a way of coming out. You can't bury it forever. Amara's mind raced as she listened to the cold certainty in Kennedy's tone. This was it. She had warned her. She had said it was coming, and now it was here. I'm not afraid of you, Kennedy, Amara said, forcing the words through her clenched teeth. If you want to tell everyone the truth, go ahead. But I won't be the one to hide anymore. There was silence on the other end of the line, and Amara almost felt like she could hear Kennedy considering her words. You really think you're going to win this? Kennedy finally asked, her voice dripping with condescension. You can't hide behind your little, good girl, act forever. People will see you for what you really are. And trust me, Amara, it's not going to be pretty. Amara's chest tightened, but she refused to back down. I don't need your approval. And I won't let you control me anymore. A long, drawn-out pause followed before Kennedy spoke again, her voice tinged with amusement. We'll see about that. But remember, I'm always watching. The line went dead. Amara stared at the phone in her hand, the cold emptiness of it echoing in her mind. She's right. The truth will come out. But I don't have to be afraid anymore. The next day at school, everything felt different. There was an almost palpable tension in the air, something that seemed to hang over the hallways like a cloud. Amara couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was about to hit. She wasn't sure where to start. Should she go to Ethan first and tell him everything? Should she confront Kennedy directly, despite the warnings? Or should she take control of the situation herself and risk everything to expose the truth on her terms? Amara knew that time was running out, and she couldn't let Kennedy control her anymore. Whatever was coming, whatever consequences she'd have to face, she had to face it head-on. She couldn't keep hiding. The day went by in a blur. Every class felt like a slow-motion nightmare, the quiet whispers, the sideways glances, the tension building in the air. It felt like the walls were closing in on her with every passing second. But then, at lunch, everything changed. Amara was sitting at a table by herself when she saw Ethan across the room. His eyes locked with hers immediately, his expression serious, almost urgent. He wasn't sitting with his usual group. He was alone. Amara's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't avoid him forever. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to let him in on what had been happening. She stood, her legs shaking slightly, and walked across the cafeteria to his table. Ethan stood as she approached, his face full of concern. Amara, you've been avoiding me all week. What's going on? Please, just tell me. Amara opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Her throat felt tight, her heart pounding in her chest. Ethan, I need to tell you something, she finally managed. I've been keeping something from you. Something important. And it's about to catch up with me. Ethan's eyes softened, and he sat down, patting the seat beside him. You don't have to tell me everything right now, but whatever it is, we can figure it out together. Amara sat down, looking him in the eyes. This was it. This was the moment she had feared for so long. The moment that could either break her or finally set her free. I've made mistakes, Ethan. And those mistakes, they're going to come out. They're going to change everything, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable. Amara, whatever you've done, it doesn't change who you are now, he said softly. You don't have to face this alone. You have me. His words, so simple and so sincere, sent a rush of warmth through her. It wasn't over. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. In that moment, Amara knew that whatever happened next, she had the strength to face it. She had made a choice. No more hiding. No more running. She was going to confront her past and take control of her future. And as she sat there with Ethan, she realized something else: she wasn't afraid anymore. Amara couldn't remember the last time she had felt this vulnerable. She sat across from Ethan in the nearly empty cafeteria, the weight of everything hanging between them like a storm cloud. But for the first time in what felt like ages, it wasn't an oppressive feeling. There was a sense of calm, of clarity, that had settled over her. She was finally taking control. Ethan's eyes were still soft, understanding, but there was an edge of concern there too. Amara, whatever it is, we can face it together. I won't judge you, I promise. Just, talk to me. The words tumbled out of her mouth in a rush, as though her soul had been waiting for this moment, too. It's about what happened back in the competition, Ethan. It's about the things I've done, the things I thought I could bury. But the truth is, I can't hide from it anymore. Kennedy, she knows things about me. Things I'm ashamed of. Ethan's brow furrowed slightly, and he reached across the table, taking her hand in his. I'm not going anywhere, Amara. But you have to trust me. Whatever happened, it doesn't define who you are now. You've grown, you've changed. You're not the same person you were. Amara took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She wasn't used to being this open, this raw, with anyone, let alone Ethan. When I was younger, I did things I'm not proud of. Things that hurt people, things that changed the way people saw me. I tried to move past it, but Kennedy, she's threatening to tell everyone. She's trying to use my past against me, to tear me down. Ethan listened carefully, not interrupting, just holding her hand tightly. What exactly did you do? He asked gently. Amara swallowed hard, her throat tight with the fear of what she was about to say. I used to bully people. People like Kennedy. People who were different from me. I was part of a group of friends who thought they were better than everyone else. I said horrible things, did horrible things. I made others feel worthless. There was a long pause before Ethan spoke again, his voice steady but full of concern. Amara, I don't know what to say. That's a lot. But I'm glad you told me. And I know it's hard, but I believe you've changed. We all make mistakes. What matters is what you've done since then. Amara's heart ached as she met his eyes, seeing the sincerity there. But at the same time, there was a deep, unshakable guilt inside her that she couldn't get rid of. But what if people don't see it that way, Ethan? What if they think I'm still the same person? What if I lose everything? Ethan squeezed her hand. You're not the same person anymore. I see that every day. And yes, people might judge you, but if you stand tall and face the truth, they'll see the real you. You can't change your past, Amara, but you can shape your future. The weight of his words pressed down on her, but it wasn't suffocating anymore. There was something freeing about them. She was finally acknowledging the truth, and for the first time in a long time, she could see a way forward. That afternoon, Amara found herself standing at the edge of the school parking lot, waiting for Kennedy. She had made the decision. She wasn't going to let Kennedy control her any longer. She was going to take back her life, even if it meant facing the consequences of her past. Kennedy had been nothing but cruel, but she didn't have to stay in the shadows of fear any longer. She would face this head-on. Amara's heart pounded in her chest as she saw Kennedy approaching, flanked by two of her usual friends. The trio looked as confident and untouchable as always, but today, something was different. Today, Amara wasn't intimidated. "Amara," Kennedy said with a smirk as she approached, clearly enjoying the power she thought she still held. "I thought you'd come running back to me by now. Ready to beg for my forgiveness?" Amara squared her shoulders and met Kennedy's gaze without flinching. "No, Kennedy. I'm not here to beg. I'm here to set things straight. I'm not hiding anymore. I won't let you control me." Kennedy's smirk faltered slightly, but she quickly recovered, her eyes narrowing. "You think you can just walk up to me and throw all of this in my face? You think you've changed? You think people will just forget?" Amara took a deep breath, finding her courage. "No, I don't expect anyone to forget. But I'm done living in fear. My past is my past. It doesn't define me, and it never will again. If you want to tell everyone, go ahead. But just know, I'm not the same person I was." Kennedy's eyes flickered with a mix of disbelief and anger. She wasn't used to being challenged, and it clearly rattled her. She stepped closer to Amara, her voice low and dangerous. "You think this is over? You think you can just sweep everything under the rug? I won't let you walk away from this, Amara. You'll pay for what you did." Amara's resolve only grew stronger as she stared at Kennedy, refusing to let her words sink in. "You can't make me pay for my past anymore. I'm not afraid of you. And whatever happens next, I'll deal with it. But I won't be your victim anymore." For a moment, there was silence, the two girls standing face to face, their eyes locked. Amara wasn't sure what Kennedy was thinking, but she didn't care. She had said her piece. Then, without another word, Kennedy turned and walked away, her friends trailing behind her. But as she walked off, Amara couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over her. The battle wasn't over, but this was the first step toward taking back control. Later that evening, as Amara sat in her room, she couldn't help but replay the conversation with Kennedy over and over in her mind. Part of her still feared what would happen next, but another part of her felt lighter. She had done it. She had stood up for herself. She had taken the first step toward healing. And for the first time in a long time, Amara felt like she was on the right path. The next morning, as she walked through the school hallways, she noticed that people were still whispering. But this time, it wasn't with judgment. It was with curiosity, with something else, a realization that maybe, just maybe, things weren't as they seemed. Amara still had a long way to go, but she was ready. She wasn't going to let the past define her any longer. And most importantly, she wasn't going to let anyone steal her future. The next day, Amara woke up with a knot in her stomach. It wasn't the usual feeling of anxiety she had gotten used to, this was different. It was the sensation of waiting, of knowing that something important was about to unfold. Kennedy's threat still loomed over her, but Amara had made a choice. She wasn't going to hide anymore. No matter what came next, she had already taken the first step toward redemption. She glanced at her phone. There was a message from Ethan. "I'll be at the school early, waiting for you. We'll get through this together." The warmth of his words was comforting, but Amara couldn't help the feeling that she was standing at the edge of something bigger than she could control. The school day ahead promised to be challenging, but it was also a moment of truth. She had no idea how Kennedy would retaliate, but the tension in the air was palpable. The school bell rang, signaling the beginning of another day, but Amara didn't feel the usual dread that came with the start of a class. She had never felt more aware of her surroundings, the whispers, the glances, the subtle judgments. As she walked through the hallway, she could feel eyes on her, but this time, she didn't shrink away. She straightened her back, held her head up high, and kept walking. She had nothing to hide anymore. Her heart raced as she entered her first class of the day. She scanned the room for Ethan and spotted him sitting by the window, his gaze already locked on her. He offered her a small, reassuring smile. The gesture made her feel like maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. As she took her seat next to him, the weight of the previous days seemed to lift, if only a little. But that sense of calm didn't last long. The door to the classroom opened, and Kennedy strode in, her usual confidence radiating through the room. She glanced at Amara, a smirk playing on her lips, before taking her seat at the front of the room. The tension between the two girls was almost tangible. Amara could feel the stares of their classmates, the tension in the air, and she knew it wouldn't take long for the rumors to spread. After the bell rang, the teacher started the lesson, but Amara found it hard to concentrate. Every few minutes, her mind wandered back to Kennedy and what she might do next. The silence in the room felt heavy, oppressive. Amara wanted to scream, to tell everyone everything, to lay her past bare and put an end to the whispers. But she knew that wasn't the answer. Not yet. Finally, the bell rang again, signaling the end of class. As Amara packed up her things, she felt someone watching her. She turned to see Kennedy standing by the door, blocking her exit. There was a malicious glint in her eyes, and Amara's heart skipped a beat. "You think you can just walk away from this, Amara?" Kennedy's voice was low, dripping with disdain. "You think you're going to waltz in here like everything's fine? You're not getting away with this. Not yet." Amara felt a shiver run down her spine, but she stood her ground. "I'm not running from you anymore, Kennedy. You can't control me. You can't make me feel small anymore." Kennedy's eyes narrowed. "Don't think this is over. You may have won this round, but I promise you, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you did. You'll regret ever standing up to me." Amara's jaw clenched. She could feel the adrenaline pumping in her veins. "You can try, but I'm not afraid of you anymore. Do your worst. I'm not going anywhere." Kennedy said nothing else, her eyes seething with anger. With a final, venomous glance, she turned and stormed out of the classroom. Amara stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, trying to steady her shaking hands. She didn't know what would come next, but she couldn't back down. Not now. Ethan was already at her side. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft with concern. Amara nodded, though her heart still pounded in her chest. "I'm fine. Just trying to get through it." "You don't have to do this alone," Ethan said, his voice steady, unwavering. "We'll figure this out, together." Amara smiled at him, feeling a rush of gratitude. "I know. I don't know what I'd do without you." They walked out of the classroom together, but the air was thick with tension. Amara knew that the storm wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. Later that afternoon, Amara sat in the library, trying to focus on her homework, but her mind kept drifting back to the confrontation with Kennedy. She could still feel the anger in her words, the sense of power she had tried to wield over Amara. But Kennedy didn't have power over her anymore. That much was clear. The door to the library opened, and Amara looked up to see Ethan walking in. He sat down beside her, setting down his backpack with a soft thud. "You've been on edge all day," he said, his voice filled with quiet concern. "I can tell something's still bothering you. You want to talk about it?" Amara sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's just, I don't know how to handle this. I know I stood up to Kennedy, but it's like she's everywhere. I feel like I'm walking around with a target on my back, like everyone's waiting for me to fail." Ethan reached over and took her hand in his. "You don't have to fight this battle by yourself. We're in this together. Whatever comes next, I'll be right there with you. You're stronger than you think." Amara felt the weight of his words sink in. She had spent so long carrying the burden of her past alone, afraid of being exposed. But now, with Ethan by her side, it didn't feel so heavy. Maybe, just maybe, she had a chance to fight back. As the afternoon wore on, Amara's resolve strengthened. Kennedy might still be lurking in the shadows, but she couldn't control her anymore. The truth was out there, and it would eventually come to light. But Amara wasn't afraid anymore. She had already taken the hardest step. She had faced her past, and she had taken control of her future. The next morning, as Amara walked through the school gates, she felt a sense of quiet determination wash over her. The crowd was still watching, but the weight of their judgment no longer mattered. Kennedy had made her threats, but Amara was no longer afraid. She had her friends, her family, and, most importantly, Ethan. Whatever happened next, she would face it head-on. The week that followed Amara's confrontation with Kennedy was nothing short of a whirlwind. The whispers that had once felt like an occasional nuisance now permeated every corner of the school. Students who had once smiled at her now avoided her gaze, and the ones who hadn't been part of Kennedy's inner circle seemed to suddenly have opinions. They didn't look at Amara the way they used to. The way they whispered, the glances that turned away when she caught their eye, she could feel the judgment. But none of it mattered. For the first time in her life, Amara stood tall. She knew the truth about who she was and where she had come from. That wasn't something anyone could take from her. She had faced her past, and now, it was time to face the consequences, whatever they may be. It was late in the afternoon when Amara received the message that made her heart stop. It was from Kennedy. "I'm telling everyone what you did. No more hiding. No more pretending you're innocent. You're going to regret not staying in your place." Amara sat there for a moment, staring at the screen of her phone. The words burned in her chest, but they didn't scare her anymore. They used to. The idea that Kennedy could expose her past, reveal the things she had done in her younger years, used to be terrifying. But now, it felt like a challenge, a final test. She took a deep breath and placed the phone back down on her desk. She didn't respond. No matter what Kennedy did next, Amara knew she had already made her peace with the past. She wasn't that girl anymore. She had changed, and she was ready to prove it. The next day, the school assembly was scheduled for the end of the week. It was the kind of event that everyone knew would be full of drama, and Amara could already feel the tension hanging in the air. Students gathered in the auditorium, taking their seats, whispering among themselves. Amara wasn't sure if it was because of her or if it was because of the growing rivalry between her and Kennedy, but either way, she was the center of attention now. Amara sat with Ethan, trying to ignore the eyes that followed her as she walked in. They sat in the back, as far away from the stage as possible. Ethan could sense the weight of the situation, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder as a silent support. But Amara knew, no matter how much she appreciated his comfort, it was time for her to stand on her own. The lights in the auditorium dimmed, signaling the start of the assembly. The principal, Mr. Thompson, walked up to the stage, microphone in hand, and began the usual speech. It was hard to focus on his words as Amara's thoughts swirled with what was about to happen next. Kennedy's threat hung heavy in her mind. "All right, students," Mr. Thompson said, his voice booming through the auditorium. "As many of you know, this week marks the beginning of a new tradition here at Madison High. Today, we're celebrating achievement, overcoming adversity, and personal growth. But before we dive into the good stuff, we have a special presentation from some of our students." Amara felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She knew, without a doubt, what was coming. Kennedy was about to take the stage, and when she did, Amara wasn't sure what she would say, but she knew it wouldn't be pretty. The crowd hushed as Kennedy made her way up to the microphone. She was dressed impeccably, her usual poise and confidence on full display. But there was something in her eyes, something darker, that made Amara's stomach churn. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," Kennedy said smoothly, flashing a practiced smile. "Today, I want to talk about something that's been bothering me for a long time. It's something that many of you may already know about, but I think it's time that everyone hears the truth. Amara's pulse quickened as Kennedy's gaze swept across the room. She knew the moment she heard those words that this was it. The truth, according to Kennedy, was about to be revealed. Kennedy paused dramatically, letting the silence settle. Then, she spoke, her voice dripping with venom. There's a certain person here at Madison High who has been hiding behind a mask for far too long. She wants you all to think she's perfect, that she's changed, that she's some kind of saint. But let me tell you the truth, she's not. She used to be a bully. A cruel, heartless bully who made my life a living nightmare. Amara Carter, the so-called new you, is a lie. A gasp rippled through the crowd as the words hit like a shockwave. Amara's stomach dropped. Her heart raced, and for a split second, she felt like the floor had been pulled out from under her. But she quickly steadied herself. Kennedy was trying to destroy her. But Amara wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing her break. Kennedy continued, her eyes locked on Amara's. Amara didn't just bully me. She bullied anyone who wasn't part of her little clique. She made people's lives miserable. And now, she's acting like she's some kind of victim, like she's changed. But she hasn't. She's the same person who tormented me in middle school. And I'm not going to let her get away with it. The words stung like 1,000 tiny needles, each one digging into Amara's skin. But something inside her refused to buckle. She had already confronted her past. What Kennedy was saying didn't have the power to destroy her anymore. Ethan squeezed her hand, giving her the strength to stand. The entire room was silent, waiting for her reaction. Amara felt the weight of every eye on her, but she refused to shrink back. She stood tall, heart pounding, and walked toward the stage. Kennedy didn't seem to expect this. She looked momentarily stunned as Amara climbed the steps to the microphone. You want to talk about the truth, Kennedy? Amara's voice was steady, but the words felt like fire in her chest. Fine. Let's talk about it. There was a moment of stunned silence before Amara continued. I was that person. I was the bully. And I am sorry. I can't change that. But I'm not that person anymore. I've learned from my mistakes. I've worked hard to become better, to make up for the things I did. And I won't let anyone tell me who I am anymore. She could feel the eyes of her classmates on her, and despite the anxiety that churned inside her, she spoke with a strength she never knew she had. Kennedy wants to remind you of the mistakes I made in the past, but what she doesn't know is that I've already faced those mistakes. I've made amends. And I'm not afraid of my past anymore. The room was still as Amara finished speaking. Kennedy stood there, her face a mix of surprise and anger, but Amara wasn't looking at her anymore. She was looking at the students, at the people who mattered. I'm not perfect, Amara said quietly. But I'm not the person I used to be. And I'm not going anywhere. As Amara walked off the stage, she felt a sense of liberation she had never known. She had faced her fears, confronted her past, and stood up for herself in a way she never thought she could. There would still be challenges ahead, but for the first time, Amara felt like she was in control. The crowd remained silent for a moment, and then the whispers began, but they were different this time. There was a shift, a sense of understanding, of realization that perhaps Amara wasn't the villain in this story after all. As she returned to her seat next to Ethan, he gave her a proud smile. You did it, he said softly. Amara smiled back, her heart still racing. I did. And I think it's just the beginning. The following weeks were a blur of tension, change, and small victories. Amara had thought that standing up to Kennedy would somehow bring everything crashing down, her reputation, her relationships, her sense of security. But instead, something unexpected happened. The people who had once whispered behind her back began to look at her differently. They no longer saw her as the bully or the outcast. They saw someone who had made mistakes, yes, but who had also found the courage to change. It wasn't an easy journey. There were still murmurs in the hallways and the occasional glance that made her stomach churn, but they were fewer now. Amara had learned how to hold her head high and face the world with the same determination that had gotten her through the toughest parts of her life. She had built her strength, piece by piece, over the past few months, and now, it was time to build her future. It was a Friday afternoon when the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Amara sat in the school courtyard, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, staring at the trees that surrounded her. It was one of those rare moments of peace when everything seemed right, and she allowed herself to relax for the first time in a long while. Ethan joined her, his usual smile on his face. He sat beside her, leaning back and glancing at the sky. "You okay?" Amara nodded, feeling a sense of contentment she hadn't known in ages. "Yeah. I think I'm okay." There was a pause before Ethan spoke again, his voice quiet but filled with something more, something deeper. "You've come a long way, Amara. I'm really proud of you." Her heart swelled at his words. For so long, she had been afraid of what others thought of her. But in this moment, she realized that it didn't matter anymore. She had fought for her redemption, and she had earned it. She had proven to herself that she was capable of growth and change. Amara smiled softly at Ethan. "Thank you. You were there for me every step of the way. I couldn't have done it without you." Ethan reached for her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. "I'll always be here. No matter what comes next." The words settled over her like a warm blanket, and for the first time, Amara allowed herself to believe them. She had spent so long doubting herself, questioning whether anyone would truly accept her for who she was. But now, with Ethan by her side, and with the people who mattered most in her life supporting her, Amara felt like she could take on anything. The end of the semester arrived before Amara knew it. The tension that had once surrounded her had dissipated, and she found herself walking the halls with a renewed sense of purpose. Kennedy, who had once been her greatest adversary, had faded into the background. Amara had no interest in playing the victim anymore. She had taken control of her story, and no one could rewrite it for her. Graduation day was approaching, and Amara stood at the front of the auditorium, waiting for her name to be called. It wasn't the end she had once imagined for herself, but it was the beginning of something new. As she sat with her classmates, the weight of her journey didn't feel so heavy anymore. She had faced down her fears, confronted her past, and made peace with who she was. Her future was no longer defined by her mistakes but by the strength she had found within herself to rise above them. When her name was called, Amara walked across the stage with her head held high. The crowd applauded, but it wasn't the loudest cheer. That didn't matter to her. What mattered was that, in this moment, she had claimed her place. As she received her diploma, she caught Ethan's eye in the crowd. He smiled at her with a mixture of pride and admiration, and she couldn't help but smile back. She had made it. The next few years were a blur of change, but for Amara, they were years of growth. She went on to college, determined to build a life that was entirely her own. Her past was never far behind, but it no longer controlled her. Every step she took was one she had earned, and every relationship she built was one founded on honesty and authenticity. Kennedy had faded from the picture, as most people from high school eventually did. But Amara didn't care about the past anymore. What mattered was the woman she had become, and the woman she was still becoming. As Amara stood in front of her dorm room mirror one evening, a sense of peace washed over her. She had come so far since that moment in the auditorium, when Kennedy had tried to tear her down. She had stood her ground, not just for herself but for every person who had ever felt like they weren't enough. She wasn't the person she had once been, and for that, she was proud. But she also knew that her journey wasn't over. The world was still full of challenges, but Amara had learned to face them head-on. With a deep breath, she smiled at her reflection. The woman who stared back at her was strong, confident, and ready for whatever came next. "Where do you go from here?" Ethan had asked her once, just before they graduated. She had smiled then, too. To the future. And now, as she looked ahead at the endless possibilities before her, she knew that whatever her future held, she would face it with the same courage and determination that had brought her this far. Because, in the end, it wasn't about where she had started or the mistakes she had made, it was about who she had become. Amara had stepped out of the shadows of her past, but she knew that her journey of self-growth was far from over. Every day that passed, she was no longer the girl she once was, but a young woman full of strength, determination, and ready to face whatever challenges came her way. After graduation, she wasn't just welcoming the future with confidence, she was eager to explore the endless possibilities that lay ahead, possibilities she hadn't even dared to dream of before. College was a fresh start for Amara. The campus was sprawling, filled with new faces and fresh opportunities. She quickly realized that she wasn't just starting over, she was facing a whole new set of challenges. Unlike the high school years filled with whispers and shadows, now she had the freedom to reinvent herself, to not be judged for her past mistakes, but for her potential and the person she was becoming. One chilly autumn afternoon, as the golden light of the setting sun streamed through her dorm window, Amara sat at her small wooden desk, writing in her journal. Her thoughts drifted from reflections on her personal growth to pondering her larger life goals. Although she had rebuilt herself, there was still a feeling of uncertainty gnawing at her. Yes, she had overcome so much, but what came next? What did the future hold for someone who had spent most of her life unsure of where she was headed? A knock on the door interrupted her train of thought. "You busy?" Ethan's voice called from outside. Amara smiled and stood up to open the door. "No, come in." Ethan stepped inside, taking a seat across from her. He studied her for a moment before speaking. "Amara, I've been thinking about something. You've come so far over the past few years. It's time for you to aim higher." Amara furrowed her brow, not quite understanding. "Aim higher? What do you mean?" "You've changed your life, faced your past, and now, I think it's time for you to chase after bigger dreams. Do something more than you've ever thought you could. Not to prove anything to anyone else, but to prove it to yourself." Amara sat back, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't thought about it that way. She had always tried to play it safe, to avoid standing out. But now, for the first time, the idea of truly reaching for something bigger didn't seem so out of reach. After everything she'd been through, why shouldn't she aim high? Ethan noticed her hesitation and leaned forward. "I know it's not easy, but you've earned this. You're ready for whatever comes next." Amara looked at Ethan, feeling a surge of gratitude and something else, hope. "Thanks, Ethan. I'll think about it." Over the next few weeks, Amara couldn't shake Ethan's words from her mind. His encouragement had ignited something inside her, something she hadn't realized was there. A desire to push herself further than she ever thought possible. She started seeking out new opportunities. She joined student leadership clubs, volunteered for community projects, and even took part in programs that helped international students adjust to their new environment. Every day, she set small challenges for herself and, little by little, she saw herself becoming more confident and capable. But alongside all these new opportunities, Amara couldn't escape the weight of her past. She still felt the need to make amends for the mistakes she had made, especially to the people she had hurt along the way. But the more she worked to move forward, the more she realized that this wasn't just about redemption. This was about her finding a deeper sense of purpose. It was about using what she had learned from her past to shape the woman she wanted to be in the future. One Saturday evening, as Amara and Ethan sat together at a local cafe, she finally decided to share her thoughts with him, thoughts she had been holding inside for weeks. "Ethan, I think I'm ready," she said, her voice steady with determination. "I want to get involved in community projects, to help people who've been through struggles like I have. I want to do something meaningful. Not just for myself, but to show others that no one has to face their past alone. Everyone deserves a second chance." Ethan's expression softened, and he smiled at her with admiration. "I knew you'd come to this point. You're going to make a difference, Amara. I believe in you." With every passing day, Amara began to see the world differently. The opportunities that once seemed too daunting were now within her reach, and she approached them with a sense of purpose she hadn't known before. No longer was she afraid of her past. Instead, she used it as fuel to drive her forward, determined to create a future she could be proud of. Her journey was just beginning, but Amara knew she was ready for whatever came next. She had faced the hardest parts of her life, her mistakes, her fears, and had come out stronger for it. And now, she was prepared to take on the world. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Amara was determined to meet them with courage, confidence, and a heart full of purpose. As Amara sat on the steps of her dorm one evening, looking out at the campus sprawling before her, she realized that this was only the beginning. The road ahead was long, but it was hers to walk. She didn't know exactly where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt excited about the future. She was no longer bound by the mistakes of her past, but empowered by the woman she had become. And that, Amara realized, was the greatest gift she could ever give herself. 3 years later. The auditorium was packed, the hum of chatter filling the air like electricity. Amara stood backstage, her palms damp with nerves, the soft rustle of her speech notes the only sound grounding her in the moment. The banner above the stage read, "Voices of Change, from Story to Impact." She was the keynote speaker. Outside, a spring breeze blew through the trees of the university quad, cherry blossoms fluttering to the ground like delicate confetti. But inside the walls of the auditorium, Amara's heart pounded, not from fear, but from a deep, resonant sense of responsibility. Tonight wasn't just another speech. It was a milestone. A mirror. A message. Amara had been chosen to speak not because she had won every battle, but because she had lost, learned, and led. As she stepped up to the microphone, the crowd quieted. Her eyes scanned the room, students, faculty, parents. Some unfamiliar faces. Some who had been there since the beginning. She cleared her throat, then smiled. "There was a time," she began, "when I didn't believe I deserved a future. I thought that once you messed up badly enough, there was no coming back. I thought that forgiveness was a gift reserved for people who had never fallen." A pause. But I was wrong. The silence was deep now, the kind that comes not from disinterest, but deep listening. "I'm here because someone believed I could change. Because I chose to believe that too. And because I learned that courage isn't about never failing, it's about showing up after you have." She went on to share her story, not the polished version, but the real one. The arrogance. The fall. The public humiliation. The storming off stage. And the quiet work afterward. The nights crying alone. The apology letters. The therapy. The volunteering. The showing up. Again and again. She spoke of Kennedy, not with bitterness, but gratitude. "She beat me that day. Fair and square. And I hated her for it, because I couldn't face myself. But in the end, losing to her gave me a chance to become someone I could be proud of." And then, with a small, almost surprised laugh, she added, "Today, Kennedy and I are friends. We still debate, just not on stage. Mostly over dinner." The crowd chuckled. Amara smiled, heart full. As her speech ended, the audience stood. A full standing ovation. Amara didn't need the applause. But she received it not as praise, but as confirmation. Her story had landed. Had mattered. Backstage, Ethan was waiting. "You killed it," he said, pulling her into a hug. "I mean, showing up after you failed. That's a line people are going to remember." Amara grinned. "Let's hope they remember the rest too." They walked out together, the air crisp with spring, the stars above winking into view. They had talked about moving in together after graduation. No rush. No pressure. Just possibility. The next morning, Amara woke up early and went for a run through the park. The world was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like permission. She ran past kids on bikes, an older couple walking their dog, students sprawled on blankets with textbooks. And she realized something. This was her life now. Not a performance. Not a second chance. Just a life. Hers. The road ahead was still long. There would still be mistakes, setbacks, heartaches. But she wasn't running from anything anymore. She was running toward everything she had yet to become. At the end of the path, Amara slowed to a walk. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. A message from Kennedy blinked on the screen. "You're everywhere this morning. I saw a post about your speech. Proud of you. Still owe you a rematch someday." Winking face. Amara laughed, her breath visible in the morning air. She replied. "Anytime. Just know I don't storm off anymore. I stay, and I fight smarter." She put the phone away and stood for a moment in stillness, watching the sun rise over the trees. Her past was behind her. Her story had been told. And her future? Still unwritten. But this time, she would write it with truth, with grace, and above all, with love. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?